Welcome to the Multifarious Man Podcast, episode 604. It's a dynamic duo for a reason, because three's a crowd. As always, I'm your host, John Michael Vincent, aka the Multifarious Man. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Multifarious Man and find links to all previous episodes of the show along with essays and reviews at www.multifariousman.com. On today's episode, I'm talking about my favorite dynamic duos from television and cinematic history. Now, what makes a duo dynamic? It's when two people are often paired together whose unique traits, when combined, usually result in success or otherwise positive results. A prime example would be, of course, Batman and Robin, the comic, TV show, and later film OGs that were the first to be labeled with this moniker. For most, when you say dynamic duo, this is who is being referenced. Now, my list is not the end-all, be-all, but I think you will enjoy the ride. But first, and before I take the break, I would like to take a couple of minutes to talk about retired General Colin Powell, who passed away on October 18th, 2021 at the age of 84. Colin Powell was the first Black U.S. Secretary of State. Powell was a retired four-star general who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the early 90s before joining the George W. Bush administration as Secretary of State. Now, before the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, Powell made the case to the United Nations Security Council that Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein had biological weapons and was developing nuclear weapons. He later said that this represented a blot that will always be part of my record. Now, although he was a Republican, in 2008 he endorsed Barack Obama for president. In years that followed, he felt increasingly detached from that party, ultimately leaving in the wake of this January 6th insurrection on the Capitol. Now, for me, what stands out about Secretary Powell is that he was born in the Bronx, raised in Harlem, and here's the big thing for me, he was a graduate of my alma mater, City College of the City University of New York, also known as CCNY in Harlem, New York. Now, here's an excerpt from this school that's named after him at City College. So the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership supports an extraordinary faculty in the social sciences dedicated to the highest standards of research. We celebrate the university's democratic and public obligations, including the responsibility to disseminate research in usable forms to concerned audiences, particularly to those striving to redress injustice or disparity. We foster creative and public scholarship, and our faculty produce research that is both relevant and in touch. The Colin Powell School is the largest unit at CCNY, with nearly 1/3 of the college's graduates each year. From psychology to business, political science to anthropology, economics to sociology, and most of the college's public service and leadership and development programs. So, again, retired General Secretary of State Colin Powell has a complicated legacy. And I think it's important to understand, especially for Black Americans. I mean, he's a son of Jamaican immigrants. It goes to show that we can be part of the system. We can be apart from the system. He rose through the ranks in military. So he served our country well, both in, for the majority of his life in public service. And regardless of what your political beliefs are, there's no denying that he was a true patriot and always stood up for what he believed in. So he will definitely be missed. And at 84, he lived a full life. So back to the show after the break. Episode 604, it's a dynamic duo for a reason, and I will give you my list of favorite movie and television duos. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold. All the things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Loki and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man.
Welcome back to the show. This is again the Multifarious Man podcast, episode 604. It's a dynamic duo for a reason, because three's a crowd. So like I said in the beginning, this episode is about my favorite dynamic duos. And again, like I said in the beginning, in the opening, Batman and Robin were the first to be called a dynamic duo. So if you're curious of what a dynamic duo is, you probably heard them reference Batman and Robin. So where do we start? Movies, TV. I mean, if you've listened to this show, you know that movies and TV are a lot of the things that I cover from episode to episode. So it's important that I kind of break it down. With my list, I broke it down into television and film. Now, some of the people that I list or duos that I list, I'll talk a little bit more about. And, that's not necessarily to mean that one is considered greater than the other or that I think it's greater than the other. But still, I just think it was important to separate it into TV and film because that way it kind of makes it stand out, makes it easier for you to follow along. Now, some of the people on this list or duos on this list, you may have heard of. Some you may not have. Some you may be surprised that I included on the list. But it's my list. You're more than welcome to send me an email, a comment through Instagram, through Facebook, through Twitter. Or if you like, you can leave a message on the Multifarious Man Google Voice line at area code 904-419-3561. That's 904-419-3561. Leave me a voice message and maybe you'll hear your voice on a future episode, or at least I'll read what you said, whether you agree with me or not. So, first up, let's talk about television. So the next group, and here's a disclaimer, or really not really a disclaimer, an explanation. So in some instances, it's the character names I'll give you. In some instances, it'll be the actor. And sometimes, the actor or actress, and sometimes it'll be both. So that's really how it goes. No rhyme or reason, but in my life of watching many TV shows, this is kind of where I came up with my list. So first out the bat, I'll go with probably my first, and I've probably spent the most time with this dynamic duo. You may not consider them a duo, but I do, because at the end of the day, they were usually the ones that were together. So Scooby-Doo and Shaggy from, of course, Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo has been out since the 60s. And if you're not familiar with the premise of Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo is a talking dog. It's a cartoon. Just go with it. Shaggy is his best friend. Shaggy is pretty much a stoner. And Scooby and Shaggy and their friends, Fred, Velma, and Daphne, ride around in the Mystery Machine and pretty much stick their nose in people's business. But at the end of the day, end up solving mysteries where usually you think it's a monster or a ghost. It always turns out to be some old dude in a mask trying to get over. But each episode, if you don't know, at some point in the episode, the group, the mystery crew, decides to split up. It always ends up with Scooby and Shaggy going one way, Fred, Daphne, and Velma going another way. Every episode, that's their formula. This is what it was. Scooby and Shaggy are scaredy cats. They don't want to go off on their own, but somehow they always are the ones that end up finding the ghost or the werewolf or whatever it is. And through some elaborate chase sequence with music, somehow they try to set a trap, and then they trick Scooby every time. They give him his Scooby snacks. Scooby snacks make him courageous. So he gets his Scooby snacks. He goes, Ruby, Ruby, Roo. And they go off. They solve the case. And always the bad guy says, you know, I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for those kids and that dog. Scooby-Doo was part of my childhood and my adulthood. I still watch Scooby-Doo when it comes around. They still come up with Scooby-Doo episodes. So, you know, future generations, past generations, people can always have a chance to experience Scooby-Doo. And for me, for those of you who have been listening to the show for a while, probably one of my highest rated episodes was episode 23, which was titled Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And that's back from March of 2016. If you haven't listened to it and you're just subscribing, go back and check it out. And I pretty much talk about all the things I love about Scooby-Doo. So that's the first out the back. Scooby-Doo and Shaggy are my first dynamic duo. Next, Kate and Allie. Who are Kate and Allie? It's a TV show from the 80s where two divorced mothers moved in together and they raised their kids together. Comedy / drama. I just remember watching this show. I can't even remember the network. It might have been CBS back in the day. But I remember it being funny. So Jane Curtin, who was one of the original cast members of Saturday Night Live, was one of the stars of this show. And, you know, it lasted for several seasons. And from what I remember, it was enjoyable. It was fun. I remember my mother liked it. So for me, it was an enjoyable show. So it's on here, not necessarily as just like a mention. I just remember watching it, the reruns probably mostly. But if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I'm not sure where it's streaming today. But Kate and Allie is on here for a dynamic duo. Next up, now this may be a little bit controversial, at least it is these days, with different changes in the country as it relates to the Confederacy, Confederate flags. This is my show. I'm putting these boys on here anyway. I don't care. Bo and Luke Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard. Now, as a kid growing up watching the show, I remember it being on CBS. I remember having a Dukes of Hazzard lunchbox, a Dukes of Hazzard racetrack. The Duke boys were always the underdog. Now, they were moonshiners, so it was illegal, but in their town of Hazard County, Boss Hogg was corrupt. And him and Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane were always having some scam to get over, to steal some money, to write up false tickets. Well, the Dukes, they were always helping the underdog. They were there to fight the good fight, to stick it to the man, all while driving around back roads, jumping ramps, romancing women, shooting bows and arrows, all these different things. They were the good guys, you know, and they were always trying to get away from the sheriff and stopping Boss Hogg from whatever diabolical plans they had. Watching this as a kid, I didn't even notice the Confederate flag on their vehicle, their orange vehicle named the General Lee. As a kid, you didn't know who General Lee was. I won't get into what they teach or don't teach in schools here in the States, but if you were a kid like me, you enjoyed it. You enjoyed the music, the intro song, The Good Old Boys by Waylon Jennings. You sang along. You pretended to be Bo and Luke Duke. The show was enjoyable. These guys were good guys, no matter how you look at it. Politics aside, they're on my list for dynamic duos. Next up, it's probably... Well, I would say for people of a certain age or when it first came out, maybe it's a little controversial, but I disagree, and I'm putting both sets on here. So I'm a big sci-fi fan, and Battlestar Galactica is one of my favorite shows of all time, both the original and the remake. And because of that, I have the same dynamic duo on here twice, or rather the characters are on here twice, even though in both iterations they're played, by different actors. And, it's a different take on it. So that's, of course, Starbuck and Apollo. So in the original series, Starbuck and Apollo were two men, best friends on the Galactica. It's the last ship, the last battle star, protecting the human race on the run from the Cylons. In the remake, the character of Starbuck was replaced by a woman, and the character was renamed Kara Thrace, and her call sign was Starbuck. She was the best pilot in the fleet. Apollo was still played by a man, and their relationship, to say the least, was complicated. Now, if you haven't seen the series, I'm not going to spoil it with what their relationship was like, but either way, the characters, undeniable, powerful characters, amazing leaders, and the shows wouldn't have been what they were without it. So that's why Starbuck and Apollo, from both the original Battlestar Galactica and the remake, are on my list. Next up, we're going back to another show that had a famous car. Now, in this case, one of the duo is human and one is a car. If you don't know what it is, it's from Knight Rider, and I'm talking about Michael Knight and KITT. Now, this show was, one of those shows that you couldn't wait to see. So the premise is Michael Knight was a cop who was killed. I'm doing air quotes, even though you can't see it in the line of duty. His face was reconstructed. He joined I can't even remember the name of the foundation, but they had money and they built a car, KITT, Knight Industries 2000. I remember what that stood for. That could drive itself, could talk, was really snarky, voiced by the actor, and I can't remember his name right now, but for those of you out there who know, he was Mr. Feeney on Boy Meets World. So in this show, David Hasselhoff, who would later go on to Baywatch fame, don't hassle the Hoff, would drive from town to town, and he would help people in need. Seems to be a lot of that going from town to town. It's like all TV shows. It's always and it's probably from, if you think about it, going back to movies, and I'll probably do an episode on it. Shane, that type of thing, or a Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, the no name guy that goes from town to town and helps people in need. That's what Knight Rider was. This car was bulletproof. It had all types of gadgets. Who didn't want to have a car that could drive itself, had turbo boost, could jump, was pretty much indestructible? So that's why Michael Knight and KITT are listed as a dynamic duo. Yes, KITT was not human, but who didn't want that car? Who didn't want to be driving around the country with a leather jacket, saving people? I know I did. Even before I could drive, wanted to be Knight Rider. Next on the list is, I almost forgot about this one, Simon and Simon. Now, I've always been a fan of TV shows with detectives, whether it's the Rockford Files, whether it's Hardy Boys, that's always been my thing. So Simon and Simon was a show with two brothers, AJ and Rick Simon. And well, it's what it was. They were detectives. They would be hired and they would solve cases. And this starred Jameson Parker, who I don't know what else he did after this, and Gerald McCraney, who's gone on to do many things. He was married to Delta Burke. I'm not sure of Designing Women fame. I'm not sure if they're still married. Gerald McCraney shows up every once in a while as the patriarch on different shows. Very good actor. He's actually pretty funny too, but Simon and Simon was one of those shows I would watch on CBS. with I think Riptide was another show that came on around the same time. You know, it was kind of like a television block. But Simon and Simon, I remember them getting into trouble all the time. It was paired with, and maybe I'm wrong about the days, but I want to say it was paired with Magnum. So it was another detective show. But two brothers, always doing what they could to solve crimes. One wore a hat. I want to say Gerald McCraney wore the hat. But it was a good show, and I haven't seen it in years, but they were definitely a dynamic duo. Seems like I'm talking about crime fighters a lot, which again, when you go back to Batman and Robin, dynamic duo, Starsky and Hutch. Starsky and Hutch were the coolest detectives. They drove the coolest car. It was a red car with a white stripe. And, you know, they got into trouble. They were always, I mean, if you ask me, one of the duos on the list that'll appear later on the film side, I see some of the hallmarks of this show. And it's, you know, Starsky and Hutch. I mean, that's what it was. 70s TV show, you know, these detectives, they weren't above the law. But, you know, they did what they could to catch the bad guy. They had all their connections. They drove fast, you know, but at the end of the day, they did it right. And of course, they always got the bad guy. You know, they'd get yelled at by their captain. You know, they were always damaging property. So a lot of those movies that might be on the list with my dynamic duo, now that I think about it, Starsky and Hutch, you know, they probably got a lot of their ideas from that type of show. Because you can't get it wrong with two partners that are kind of similar, but they butt heads. But at the end of the day, they work together to solve crimes. Now, the next one on the list probably made the career of one of them, who would go on to be one of the biggest action stars in the world. Now, of course, if you don't know by now, I'm talking about the show Moonlighting, and my dynamic duo are Dave and Maddie. So they were played by, goodness, I'm drawing a blank, from Mr. Die Hard himself, Bruce Willis, who played David Addison, private detective, and Maddie played by, and I'm drawing a blank, so I'll have to edit it back in later. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on this one. You know what? This is why we have technology. I'm going to look it up on IMDb, and I'm embarrassed that I just can't even think about the actress's name. Oh, I didn't even have to finish looking. Sybil Shepherd. So she was a former model that I want to say she inherited the detective agency in a divorce or something on that line. Either way, you know, she owned it and wanted to close it down. But, you know, Bruce Willis's character, David Addison, convinced her to keep it on, and they became partners. Moonlighting was an amazing show with witty dialogue, crazy characters that worked in the office. And, you know, they really were really good sleuths. And I love a good detective story. What made this show and these characters work so well was the chemistry, their relationship. They started out butting heads, and then at some point in time, you know, they had a romantic relationship. You can debate whether or not that's when the show went downhill, because the whole sexual tension that built up over time may have been a big part of it. I don't care. Moonlighting, and I don't know if it was the theme music, or it was just these actors, you know, and then Bruce Willis, of course, took off as a superstar with, you know, the first Die Hard, you know, and so on and so on. But if you ask me, they'll go down as one of the best dynamic duos in history, and it's probably one of my top shows of all time. Now, the last one I have on this list for TV, and again, this isn't end all be all, and there's probably many more that you could probably think of. I'm going to go with Richard Castle and Beckett from the show Castle. This show starred Nathan Fillion, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, from Firefly and currently The Rookie. He is a writer who uses his influence with the mayor to, he's writing a series of books, and he wants to base the next one on this female detective Beckett. And he gets the mayor to allow him to be a liaison. So of course he's a mystery writer. He helps her with her cases. The show lasted 8 years. And I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't watch the 8th season yet. But the show, it progresses, their relationship progresses. But they're a powerful team. She's a really good detective. She knows the law. She knows the rules. She knows what she's doing. And Castle, as a novelist, he has a huge imagination. He's really good at researching things. And it's good to see how their interaction allowed them to solve many cases. That's really what the show was about, solving the cases. But their relationship was the biggest part of it. So that's why they're on my list of dynamic duos. So that is television. Now, because I've done so many and probably talked longer than I expected to for the first part, I'm going to take a short break. And when we return, we'll talk about dynamic duos in film. So sit back and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. Again, this is episode 604 of the Multifarious Man podcast. It's a dynamic duo for a reason. So before the break, I was talking about dynamic duos from television. So now that we're back, we're going to talk about some of my dynamic duos from the film world. So in this section, and I realized as I was putting this list together, in some instances, I'll talk about the actors, like if it was a couple of actors that had multiple films together, regardless of the characters. So in this case, it's the actors that really made the dynamic duo, playing multiple characters, and sometimes the same characters across multiple films. In some instances, it's a single film pairing, and it's really the characters that stood out. So, bear with me. All right. So the first up are Robert Redford and Paul Newman. These are two cinematic geniuses, whether it's from acting, directing. They both have a long history of films, and they're considered some of the best at what they do. Now, the movies that I'm mentioning for these two and why they're on my list are Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is probably one of the greatest westerns of all time, if you ask me, and The Sting, which is probably one of the greatest heist movies. Many movies have tried to copy what they did, and there's a reason why both of these movies are award-winning. Paul Newman and Robert Redford, their chemistry when they're on screen together is a reason why these two men are such phenomenal actors. And their legacy has probably influenced many, many films that came after it, and how you pair people. And there's just no denying what they were able to do. In fact, the funny thing is from the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a little side note, the Hole in the Wall gang, and that's the name of the gang from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Paul Newman, his philanthropic endeavors. He had the Hole in the Wall gang. He has a camp for kids. All of the proceeds from Paul Newman salad dressing would go towards this. So he was really good at giving back. So a lot of orphan kids, a lot of kids in need, he was able to support through his Hole in the Wall gang camps. Robert Redford, of course, Sundance Film Festival, which he heads up each year. It's kind of funny that it kind of came out of what they put together and started with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And then, of course, heist movies. If you want to go back and, look at some of the different things, even, one of my favorite movies, Harlem Nights, you can see the elements that it took from The Sting. But first dynamic duo on the list for movies is Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Next up are the characters of Reggie Hammond and Jack Cates. Now, of course, they were played by Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte in the 48 Hours and another 48 Hours movie. 48 Hours is probably the movie that really made Eddie Murphy a movie star. And, the two characters here, one's an ex-con, one's a cop who has 48 hours. He gets him out of jail in 48 hours to help him solve a crime. Probably most of the movies in the 80s, which kind of went that kind of buddy cop, even though Eddie Murphy was not a cop in this movie, I understand. But these buddy pictures that involve police, everything that came after it in the 80s probably should pay homage. And in fact, it probably wouldn't have happened without this pairing. So I consider them the OGs. And they could not, I couldn't do this list without having Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte and the characters they played in 48 Hours. Which leads right into the next one, Riggs and Murtaugh. This is the characters from Lethal Weapon. Now, they did 4 of them. You could probably skip the last one, which was 4. But the Lethal Weapon movies, they've been spoofed. I can't even say that. They've been spoofed. Again, I can't say the word spoof. There was a movie in the 80s or 90s called Loaded Weapon. But anytime you have if you think of the prototypical cops, buddy cops getting yelled at by their captain, for breaking the rules, for blowing stuff up, for not following instructions, but doing, the right thing to solve the cases. It's probably someone making fun of Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh getting yelled at by their captain. And of course, these guys were played by Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. Whether you like Mel Gibson or not, he's had ups and downs, over the years with, some things he's done in public. But that's not what this list is about. I'm just talking about the characters that they played, and Lethal Weapon kind of paved the way for a lot of them. So, it's that action comedy that has dramatic elements. Like I said, 48 Hours can lead directly to Lethal Weapon, which leads to a couple of others that are on this list. So in fact, I'll actually jump down to 2 of them because I think it kind of goes right in line with it. The first, of course, is, what did I do with it? I wrote it down. So Marcus and Mike Lowry. So Marcus Burnett and Mike Lowry, bad boys. Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. 2 cops, they're bad boys. They, one's the family man, one's the Lothario, who's, super clean, super rich. I'll let you guess who played who, Martin and Will. But they ended up doing 3 movies. The final one came out about a year and a half ago. And they're just funny. So they're action pictures, you get to see them in action, a lot of comedy. And they play well together. These are brothers. They're partners, they're brothers. And they stand out in the dynamic duo category. And I remember when we saw the first Bad Boys, saw it at a movie theater in Brooklyn with some friends of mine from City College, which we mentioned in the beginning when we talked about Colin Powell. And in fact, my good friend Ralph Navarro ended up being one of the henchmen in Bad Boys 2. So it brings it back again. So, proud of that. Really enjoyed that series. But Marcus Burnett and Mike Lowrey, Bad Boys. Next on the list is, yes, I know one of them's controversial, but I don't care. In the 70s, they made some of the best movies you could see, starring two black men. And that, of course, I'm talking about Sidney Poitier and Bill Cosby. They had a trilogy of movies, and I don't know why when I was growing up, I thought, they played the same characters in each movie. They didn't. As many times as I've seen the movies, I realize that now. But as a kid, when you're watching these movies on TV, and you see the same actors and they're very similar and the plots are similar, you're thinking, same movie, it's a different movie, but it's a sequel. Nah, but those movies are Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, and A Piece of the Action. Sidney Poitier directed all of the movies, and I found out they were produced by First Artist, which was actually a production company that involved Sidney Poitier, Paul Newman, and a few other actors. But if you've never seen these movies, they are classics. And that's why these two are a dynamic duo, because their comedic timing, they play off each other well. Poitier and Cosby, they're up there with screen giants in terms of their chemistry on screen. They're both charismatic. They chew up the scenes, but neither one overshadows the other. These are classics in my household, and in my book. So if you haven't seen it and you want a dynamic duo, Sidney Poitier, Bill Cosby, and it's the trilogy they did, even though they're not really a trilogy, but Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, and A Piece of the Action. Next up, if you want to stay with kind of like actors / comedians, Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder. Now, these two guys are like polar opposites if you think about it. Gene Wilder is a comedian for movies. He did Mel Brooks movies, The Producers, Young Frankenstein. Richard Pryor, probably the greatest stand-up comedian, in my opinion, in history. And you don't have the Eddie Murphys, the Chris Rocks of the world without Richard Pryor. When these two got together, it was magic. They did the movies Stir Crazy, Silver Streak, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and Another You. These movies are still funny today. I mean, yeah, there's certain things and there's certain elements, it's a different time, but go back, watch these movies if you've never seen them, and you'll understand why I consider them to be a dynamic duo, because they play well off each other. I mean, these are gut-bustingly funny movies. I don't care how many times I've seen them. They're still funny. Stir Crazy, Silver Streak, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and Another You. That's why Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder are on the list. So I'm going to throw you a curveball. And I was surprised at first when I was putting this list together, why I didn't think of it before. And then I remembered in the early 80s, these two did several movies together. HBO used to show these movies all the time. So I don't know if I'm influenced by the fact that they were on all the time and I saw them all the time, but I think if a movie's bad, I'm not going to watch it again. These movies were good. I really enjoyed them. So I'm talking about Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn. And the movies they did together are Foul Play and Seems Like Old Times. Foul Play, basically the premise is Goldie Hawn, she meets someone, gonna go on a blind date, something happens. He leaves some undeveloped film in her bag, and that just basically starts everything. People are dying. People are trying to stop her. Chevy Chase plays a detective that's trying to help her. This was the first movie they did together, and their chemistry on screen together, it just works. Goldie Hawn, small, demure, of Laugh-In fame, so she can do physical comedy. Chevy Chase, Saturday Night Live, he can do physical comedy. You put them together, and it's a perfect combination. And in fact, they would revisit this combination a few years after Foul Play with a movie called Seems Like Old Times. In this, they play former married couple, so they're divorced. Chevy Chase shows back up in her life. He's accused of murder. So he's hiding out at her cabin, and, basically the whole movie is about him in hiding, them trying to find out what really happened, and, revisiting their romance, all the while hiding from her current husband. So, Seem Like Old Times. Definitely check it out. It's worth it. Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn. That's why they're a dynamic duo. Next up, and it seems like I'm doing Saturday Night Live a lot on this, but the Blues Brothers. If you've never heard of the Blues Brothers, if you've never seen the Blues Brothers, you probably shouldn't be listening to this show. The Blues Brothers started as a skit on Saturday Night Live with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd as the Blues Brothers, Jake and Elwood Blue. Was that their last name? Doesn't matter. But basically, they turned, they wore black hats, black glasses, suits, played music, danced, and they turned this into a movie. The Blues Brothers is probably one of the funniest comedies you ever want to see. It's a road picture. They got a tank of gas, they got a car and a tank of gas, and they have basically the whole premise is they're getting the band back together. They're criminals. They get out of jail and they're getting their band back together to raise money for the orphanage they grew up in. So they have to get from one city all the way up to Chicago to pay money so that the orphanage doesn't get foreclosed on. And of course, everybody in the world is trying to stop them. One of the funniest movies you ever want to see. Still holds up. John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd together. I mean, it's sad, that John Belushi died tragically at a young age. They probably would have done more movies together. And it's definitely worth it. That's why they're on the list. The next two are probably, for different reasons, they're probably, my favorites. And, there's no two bones about it. Abbott and Costello, the comic geniuses from, the old days. They started out in vaudeville, and then they went on to make movies together. Now, when I was growing up in New York, Channel 11, WPIX, it seemed like on Sundays before the Yankee games, they would show an Abbott and Costello movie. So I saw all the Abbott and Costello movies. Buck Privates, Who's on First, Hold That Ghost. Those are just to name a few. These two are the prototypical comedian and straight man. And, they physically look different. They did physical comedy. They did wordplay, all those different things that, we give credit to people later on. Those old vaudeville comedians, the things they came up with, they would, mine a joke for 10 minutes just to get to that punchline. And of course, Who's on First is still one of the funniest stand-up routines. The whole thing of, the baseball team and what are their names? Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third. So imagine having a conversation and you're asking the names of the people on the baseball team and they're, who's on first? What, who, what, they're the strangest things in the world. But these two in their movies, they always play different characters, but you just smile every time you saw them. So, it was part of my childhood, but it holds up. There's a reason why, they're mentioned along with the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy. These were truly, truly gifted comedians. And they worked well together, from radio to TV to movies. And it stands the test of time. Now, finally, and if you've listened to my show before, you know why I'm having these two on here. And that, of course, would be Bogey and Bacall. Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall. Theirs is the romance that, songs and stories were written of. They, met in Hollywood, got married, and they were married until Bogart's untimely death. Their first movie they did, To Have and Have Not, if you haven't seen it, it's just one of my favorite movies. Yes, it's black and white. Yes, it's old timey. Humphrey Bogart is probably my favorite actor, so you have to forgive me. To Have and Have Not, just know that if you want to see two people together on film and want to know what chemistry is, what that, how do you define it when, two actors together, it just snaps. It just has it. Bogart and Bacall, To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, Dark Passage, Key Largo. Those 4 movies, they were paired in those movies, and then they were, paired in life. And there's a reason why that it just works. I don't know what to tell you other than if you haven't seen these movies, because, I'm not going to watch, old timey movies. I'm just telling you, you don't know what you're missing. I recommend you go back and listen to episode 11. This was from December of 2015 when I did this episode. Episode 11 is called Just Like Bogey and Bacall. And I'm telling you about my love of Bogart and his movies. So there you have it. That's my list of dynamic duos. Let me know whether you agree with me or not. Let me know your thoughts. Again, you can send me an instant message on Instagram. You can send me something on Twitter, Facebook, or again, you can reach out on the Multifarious Man phone line, which again is 904-419-3561. Now, before I close out and take a break, and when we come back, I'm gonna give a review of one of the shows I'm really enjoying right now. I'm going to mention some honorable mentions. So these are people that didn't make the top list, but maybe you heard of them, maybe you haven't. Nick and Nora Charles. These are the title characters from the Thin Man series. Husband and wife detectives. Yes, another old-timey movie, but, some comedy. The Thin Man series, is up there with their dog Asta. If you do a lot of crossword puzzles, Asta is usually an answer. It comes from the Thin Man. Martin and Lewis. This is Dean Martin, who would later go on to be one of the Rat Pack, and Jerry Lewis, Jerry's kids. For a long time, these two were the top grossing box office duo in history. Like when Martin and Lewis made a movie, it made bank. Before they had a very public split and went on their own separate ways. Their movies together, some of the funniest. Their stage show, they were together for years. Martin and Lewis, that's who we're talking about. So they're definitely a dynamic duo. Next, also from the movies, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. They write songs about this. Fred and Ginger did movies together, and they're known for dancing. That's pretty much it. I'd love to mention the names of movies. I'll just have them on the list because I've heard of Fred and Ginger. Even if I haven't seen all their films, I know who Fred and Ginger are. Next, not even from a movie, but from TV, Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon. Johnny Carson is known as one of the greatest talk show hosts of all time. Ed McMahon was, the original sidekick. So when you think about Andy Richter and some of the others that came along later on some of these late night talk show hosts, Ed McMahon was the original, side man. He was the original straight man to Johnny Carson's, foolishness on his show. The Great Carmack where Ed McMahon would open a Johnny Carson, wearing this turban would just say 3 random words or phrases, and then Ed McMahon would open up the envelope and read what the phrase was, and it'd always be something comical. But from him going "Ayo" and always laughing at Johnny's jokes and kind of being there on the couch when the guest came out, there was something about Ed McMahon in that position that there's a reason why comedy duos work. One guy's telling the jokes, one's the straight man. So Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon. And then lastly, Adam West and Burt Ward. I mean, I started off talking about Batman and Robin being the original dynamic duo. You can't leave off Adam West and Burt Ward from the 60s TV show Batman. Same bat time, same bat station. They would go on to be part of, the metaverse. They would show up everywhere. Everyone knows who Batman and Robin are. Everyone knows who Adam West and Burt Ward are. So the fact that I have the phrase dynamic duo, I could not finish this without having them on here. So that's it. That is my dynamic duo. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know this is a longer episode than usual, but that's all right. Sometimes I just go on and on and on. Now, when I get back, I'm going to give you my review of the show, The Equalizer, which I'm really enjoying right now. So just one moment and we will be back. We are back. Welcome back to the show, episode 604 of the Multifarious Man podcast. It's a dynamic duo for a reason, or three's a crowd. So, to close out the show, I want to kind of review a show that I've really been enjoying right now. And, maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. I recommend you checking it out. So, The Queen Has No Equal. I'm talking about Queen Latifah. Simply put, she is hip-hop royalty. I've been a fan since her days of her singles like Ladies First, UNITY. UNITY, that's a unity. Yeah, I know. I'm not a singer. And Latifah's had it up to here. And, of course, her collaborations with De La Soul and the rest of the native tongues. So, from the platform of music, she moved on to film and television with standout roles such as Cleo in Set It Off, and Khadijah James in Living Single. Nowadays, she's headlining the CBS remake of the series The Equalizer. Now, you don't need to be familiar with the 80s TV series or even the recent movie series starring Denzel Washington before watching this show. The premise is simple. A former U.S. Special Forces soldier / clandestine operator, Robin McCall, played by Latifah, offers her services at no charge to people that have nowhere else to turn. Let's be clear. She's not a mercenary for hire. She only helps those with the most need. Whether someone is chasing them, trying to kill them, stole from them, maybe someone's missing. That's where, she puts a message out on the dark web message boards and people find her and she decides that she's going to help them. So, adding that to the plate, or her plate, is the fact that she's a divorced parent with primary custody of her teenage daughter. She's the vigilante that often crosses paths with the NYPD and, of course, her former employer, the CIA. First off, you need to suspend your disbelief and accept the fact that Latifah is a highly trained soldier that is proficient in weapons and hand-to-hand combat. That's the premise. You got to accept it. She's the hero. Some people just have that it factor. Latifah has charisma in spades. I mean, she can be serious, playful, flirtatious, self-deprecating, coy, arrogant, and more with practice ease. Her surrounding cast, which includes the always amazing Lorraine Toussaint as Aunt V, Adam Goldberg, you may remember him as the weird roommate on Friends as Harry, Lisa Lapira as Mel, who's Harry's wife, Tori Kittles as Detective Marcus Kane, Christopher Noth from, Mr. Big, as Bishop, her former CIA handler, and newcomer Laya DeLeon Hayes, and forgive me if I'm saying her name wrong, as Latifah's daughter Delilah. Now, what I enjoy about the show is the camaraderie, the edge of the seat action, thrown in with some comedy and heart. I mean, the show is definitely a drama, but there are lighter moments sprinkled in, during the character interactions. Yes, there's a lot of violence, in line with probably more with shows like Alias than 18. So in other words, there's a body count. Each episode, various thugs, nameless thugs and henchmen are killed in each episode. This is just what happens. Latifah's a badass. It's as simple as that. She handles the business. And people always underestimate her, always asking, who are you? What are you doing here? She shows up on her motorcycle. She's got a gun. She fights them, all the while trying to keep this secret from her daughter, who just thinks her mom heads up she's the head of an organization, that travels the world and helps people. Can't think of what that's called. But either way, she doesn't know what her mother does, and that's part of it. And then, of course, helping the police and sometimes getting in the way. The police are trying to catch her while also, accepting her help. So you have to accept that. Of course, the characters of Harry and Mel is kind of her oversight, goes out with her on some missions. She's a sniper. Harry is your hacker. So they have their basic bat cave, their secret lair, where they do all their research and tracking and all those things. It's very formulaic, but Latifah and the other actors really, really make this show. If you are a fan of other CBS procedurals, like the many acronym titled shows, I'm talking about all the NCISs, the CSIs, the FBIs, you know what you get. On a side note, I'm proud to say that Mel, who is played by Lisa Lapira, was a scene partner of mine when we both attended, where you've heard this name before, City College of New York. And again, like I said, I will always cheer the success of former CCNY students, people that I know, people I've passed along the way. But that's not the main reason I like this show, but it's nice to see a familiar face, and I'm happy for her success. That's it for this week. This was a longer episode than usual, but you're talking about dynamic duos. The show had to run twice as long as normal. That's what I have for this week. Let me know what you think. That's it. The Multifarious Man is out of here, and I'll catch you in 2 weeks. Peace. The Multifarious Man podcast is produced and edited by Multifarious Man Productions. Your host is John Michael Vincent, aka The Multifarious Man. Original music and lyrics by John Michael Vincent.
Numerous and varied, greatly diverse and manifold. All the things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand, I'm the multifarious man.